I'm Dr. Bart Rademaker, and this is Prescription for Your Transformation: Real People, Real Conversations, and Real Success. And this is part two of an incredibly enlightening and inspiring conversation with Akshay Nanavati. And so if you haven't heard the first one, go ahead and listen to that one first, or just listen to this one and listen to that one afterwards. And then we'll also have part three as well. So actually, I'd like to talk about disidentification. It's a hard word to kind of speak, but it's an important word to consider, and also a very complicated one to navigate. And so tell us a little bit about this whole concept of that, and how important is it really for all of us, mortal and perhaps simple human beings, to actually really be able to experience life in a much richer and blissful way.
Mm-hmm. So to answer the second part of that question, it is everything. Not the inability to disidentify from the self is what causes us a great deal of pain and misery. Because so many of us, and I've gone through this, which is why when I went into the darkest corners of my own soul, was attaching the reality of what is me and what is real to my thoughts, to my feelings, and my experiences. That became me. We'll say things like, I am depressed, I am sad. And that becomes who we are, as opposed to saying things like, my brain is going through a state of depression from time to time, but I am not my brain, and my brain is not me. Like, we are not our thoughts, we are not our feelings, we are not our experiences. We are the thinker of our thoughts, the feeler of our feelings, and the experiencer of our experiences. There is a space between what is and who we choose to be outside of what is. Now, for many of us, we aren't aware that there is a space. So something happens and we react to the emotion as opposed to consciously responding to it. So the fundamental, before we can even disidentify, what's really important to us to acknowledge is to acknowledge that we don't control most of what happens in our brain. Like right now, as I'm sitting here talking to you, Bart, and somebody, let's say, comes into this room with a gun, my brain's going to respond with fear. I'm not choosing that response. My brain chooses that response for me, and it's a valuable response. So our emotional responses to stimuli, to external stimuli, is often as a result of survival mechanisms, genetics, evolution, including past patterns of behavior that have led to who we are today. So some people will see something in the world and respond with a different emotion than others, right? You can have two objective external stimuli, and two people are going to respond to it emotionally. Why does that happen, right? Because of different patterns. So if we acknowledge now that I don't control of the initial emotion in response to external stimuli, I can accept the emotion instead of resisting the emotion, instead of fighting the emotion, and just accept it, become aware of it, acknowledge its presence. And then from that space, I can disidentify from it and say, that is not me. I can just accept the isness of that reality and then transcend it to choose who I want to be instead. And that's where the disidentification happens. Is I am not, like, I'll give you a very concrete example. When I came back from the war, I was diagnosed with PTSD. They told me that because I struggled with survivor's guilt, I was jumpy with loud noises, I struggled with being in crowds, that these are symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, as I delved down the path of researching neuroscience, psychology, spirituality, and my own healing, I came to distinguish post-traumatic stress from post-traumatic stress disorder. Post-traumatic stress is not indicative of disorder. We as a society make them the same, but they're not the same. I was jumpy with loud noises. Why? Because my brain learned to say loud noises equals death. So you better be hypervigilant. I spent 7 months in a war zone where loud noises meant a bomb that could kill me. Inevitably, I was more hypervigilant. That's not a disorder. That's a normal human response to war, right? So by removing the label of disorder, I was able to disidentify from that as to who I am, and just say, okay, you know what? This is a normal human response. My brain is just doing this as a survival mechanism, and that makes sense that it's doing it. But I'm not going to make that mean there's something wrong with me. This is just like, yeah, hey, cool. You do you. Like, literally, I talk to my brain out loud as if it's a separate entity from myself, because it is. There's the mind and the brain. The brain is the physical structure. The mind is the consciousness. And they both work hand in hand. One feeds into the other. But when we disidentify, we can create, and we can literally change the physical structure of our brain. The science of neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to change itself, has shown that no matter how old we are, we can change the physical structure of our brain through conscious practice, through conscious direction of our mind. But that starts with accepting the isness of what shows up, accepting the sort of the things beyond our control, and then transcending it by disidentifying with it in order to create who we want to become.
So clearly what you're saying is that we're not our behaviors. And the other part that you're also saying in a different way is that, our identity is what we habitually do. And so we get stuck with this concept of, okay, I'm keeping on doing this, therefore I'm that. And so I had this, run in with my own little girl, and she says, I'm stupid. And I says, no, you're not stupid. You just did a stupid thing. So we're programmed in this way for whatever reason, right, wrong, or indifferent. But most of that programming happens in the first 7 years of life. And
Mhm.
so, unfortunately, we are victims, and this is the only victimhood that I will accept, is that we are victims of misunderstandings based
Right.
on the fact that people have taught us certain things when we had an immature brain that couldn't process the information, and it was just reinforced over time, and now we're kind of stuck with it unless we do something about it. So here's my question for you, because I think this is part relevant. Because we do live in a very busy world. I mean, most of us at least do. And so we're just caught up, with the culture and the obligations and the ideas of what we need to do so that we can be, right? So what do you tell people, right? To stop for a moment and recognize that, yeah, we are not our behaviors. What are you telling people to start doing so that they recognize that they can create that space? And then, quite frankly, I can see that then we have a lot more freedom of choice.
Absolutely. There are some of the sort of basics of mindfulness, meditation, of course. What meditation does is makes you aware of that space between what is and who you choose to be outside of what is. But it's as simple as often like little practices. Set an alarm on your phone every hour, pause and acknowledge what you're feeling. Hey, feeling some fear. I'm feeling some anxiety. I'm feeling at peace. I'm feeling calm. I'm feeling joy, whatever. And then you say, okay, cool. My brain's feeling that. That's on me. Like literal actions. You can acknowledge that. The simple awareness that we are not that becomes the doorway to actually embracing that and then using that, right? So you have to constantly, and the practice of awareness is relentless. It does not stop. You don't one day, I myself, I can get caught up in the day-to-day grind. Like you said, life is busy, right? I get caught up and then suddenly I'm like, oh yeah, I'm becoming I'm becoming the emotion of thought as opposed to choosing who I want to be instead of it, right? And so simply taking time to create that space every day, like you can do it at a line when you're standing in a coffee shop. You can do it before you go to bed. Acknowledge that you are not this identity. Acknowledge, hey, this thought's happening, but I am not this thought. Literally using mantras. I use mantras all the time. Even labeling, that's the practice. That's why the practice of acknowledging the emotion. Neuroscience has shown that when you label an emotion, it reduces activity from the emotional parts of your brain and increases activity in the prefrontal cortex, the front part of your brain associated with focus and awareness. And essentially what that means is it's allowing you to create that space between emotion and who you and the conscious self, the higher self, on what you want to do with that emotion. So practicing it through these tools of meditation, journaling, self-awareness practices like that, like I said, literally creating a trigger every time before literally I do this when I get in the car to drive, before I just immediately start driving. And it doesn't always happen. Sometimes I'm in a rush, I got to get somewhere, but more often than not, I'll pause and acknowledge that what I am engaging with is not reality as it is. So what I mean by that is, and this is what, again, coming to the disidentification part, is that we often feel reality is reality as opposed to our lens of the reality. The thing is, like, imagine if we're all wearing red glasses. It doesn't matter if you're looking at a green tree, the green tree is going to look red because you're wearing red glasses. We all are wearing those glasses. These are our belief systems, our mental models of the world, our perspectives, our constructs, and these constructs shape our reality. So for many people, they don't see reality as just a lens of reality. They see reality as real. So why do we have some people who, they could go through, two people can go through the same experiences, and one person is extremely negative, life sucks, everything is terrible, and the other person is like, oh, this is a beautiful learning opportunity, right? Same experiences, different reactions. Why? Because the constructs are different. So simply by acknowledging that, hey, look, reality is not real. Everything is a construct. And at its most basic level, when I see a tree and I look at it as green, what makes it green? Because I have been taught from a childhood that color is green. So there's this imperceptible, and I mean literally imperceptible, moment between pure experience and our constructs that we attach to it. And we attach constructs to everything. Another simple example, when I walk up to a door, I don't have to think about how to open that door handle. It's part of me. Why? Because I've taught. that reaction, that response to all stimuli has been cultivated. So what I do, and I was coming back to when I sit in the car, I just pause for a second and acknowledge that I am the dreamer creating this reality. Simple thing, but it separates me from reality as it is and me as the creator of this reality. And by doing that, it allows me to recognize that I have constructs, that I am separate from that reality is inherently real, and I am the creator of it. So I'm always aware that the truth of the matter is, and this is again where sometimes in spirituality you hear this concept of find yourself, but the reality is there is no self to find, because we are just there's only a self to create. And so by simply creating these different like anchor points, you can do it when you stand in line at Starbucks, you can do it when you get in the car, you can do it when you wake up in the morning. So you're creating these little trigger points that these particular situations, you can build a habit that these particular situations, they will pause. I will pause and acknowledge that reality isn't real, and that I am the creator of my own reality. And you can do it in multiple different ways. By saying that, you can do it as just an anchor, like, for me, and this is like a little bit more advanced, getting into lucid dreaming and stuff, but that's the terminology I use, is I am the dreamer in this dream, so I'll just say like a mantra like that to recognize that this is a dream reality and I'm constructing it. You can just pause to acknowledge the feeling. Hey, my brain is going through an experience of fear right now, or of calm right now. And all these little moments are just building the habit pattern of saying that I am not the self, I am whoever I choose to be. And so the practice is also kind of to recognize that think of ourselves less as human beings than human becomings, right? So there is a being, because like you said, in some sense, we all are victims to our past patterns that shaped us. So I can't control the fact that, this happened when I was 6 years old. It shaped my brain. Yes, I'm a victim to that to some degree, but by acknowledging that I don't have control over it, I can then transcend it. And so I can become. So the being self, I always distinguish two selves. The being self is the self I don't control. The becoming self is the self I'm always in charge of. And by acknowledging the space between the two, simple awareness of it allows me to then do something about it.
Yeah, there's this interesting concept, the decision you make right now is going to affect your future.
Exactly.
So my question then also more specifically is that, I get it. I get what you're saying. And I love this practice. In fact, I don't do enough of it for sure, because I get caught up in all the things that I'm working on and the suffering and everything else.
I'll
Right?
do. Yeah.
What would you tell people, right, so that they could absolutely engage with and embrace as to the ultimate reason or motivation to implement this practice? Because it is, transforming, and it is transcending to do this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the reality is, if you don't, you're gonna let fate choose itself for you. Like Carl Jung puts it again more profoundly than I could. He says, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. So most of us are operating from those forces that our brain, like we are just like you said, we are to some degree a victim of our past, and you can choose to stay that way if you want. But wouldn't you rather control your own destiny? Now that's a double-edged sword, right? Because if you control it, then you get to create your life as you want. But if you also are in control of it and your life isn't the way you want, guess whose fault it is? But there's a double-edged sword to seizing responsibility of your life. But ultimately, it's worth it, because if you don't, it's being done for you. And that's the strong why is that you get to create your reality. Like that's the most profound thing, because if you, like I said, if you don't, like, reality is being constructed for you all the time. And there's the P.D. Uspensky, he's a psychologist who wrote this book, The Psychology of Man's Possible Evolution. He summarizes the essence of this beautifully. He says, man is a machine, but a very peculiar machine. He's a machine that, when recognizing he is a machine, can cease to be a machine. So what that means, because it's a dense quote, what that means is that we are a machine in that I don't control my brain's response to fear when a guy comes in with the gun, right? So I'm a machine, but a very peculiar machine, because by acknowledging that machine-like behavior, the fact that I don't control most of what happens, the fact that I am a victim to what my world created before me, to my past patterns, I can then cease to be a machine by accepting that. And so the why is that you can choose. You can live your life as a machine, or you can live your life in control. And like I said, it is a double-edged sword. And this is why there's a very alluring nature to being a victim, because, and I get it, because I've been in victim mode a lot of my life when I was in these, because if I'm a victim, it's not my fault. Like, the world did this to me. And so it's very alluring. It's very, very enticing to say it's not my fault, so I don't get to do anything. The world was out to get me. And like, it's very like comforting that, right? But if you say, you know what, look, these things happened. I can't control XYZ happened, but I can control my fate. Now you don't get to be a victim anymore. And there's power in that, but it's also a burden. to me, it's worth it. And anybody who pursues the path of seizing responsibility for their own destiny, as challenging as it may be, inevitably it will lead to a far more rewarding and fulfilling life than just being a victim your whole life.
You know, what's interesting with that is that, we live in an intelligent universe. Nothing happens by random. And so essentially we can look at the summation of our life till this very moment as to all the choices that you've made, all the experiences, all the memories, all the, emotions to this very, very moment. So technically it's your fault, right? If you're listening in on this podcast. But my point is this, is that, as I mentioned earlier, the decisions you make now is going to affect your future. And so the question that we can always ask is, well, what is it that I really want, really? And I have two reallys in there. One really because what I really want is what I'm thinking that I should want versus what I really want, what is, in alignment with my spirit and my soul. And so then my point with that, more specifically, is, it's my belief that we all desire divine happiness, and however you want to define divine happiness. But one of the simple processes is, well, just get rid of everything that makes you unhappy, right? But so ultimately, with the choices that you make, and finding this separation, this space, in essence, you're also looking for happiness. You're looking for bliss. You're looking for peace. It's almost in contrast, and then I want you to give the answer that I think is that I have too to this question. Then it's almost in contrast then to the search for suffering.
It absolutely is, right? It feels very much in contrast to that. Like, why would I seek that if what we're looking for is sort of bliss, is peace? But the reality is, as I said, you're going to suffer anyway. And so when you start to recognize that happiness is not the elimination of sadness, happiness is the ability to find the gift in sadness. You're going to be sad in life at some point, and you want that to happen because you can't really know happiness unless you know sadness. Right. So why you seek out suffering? Because it's a doorway to true bliss. Like, the reason I know what the beauty of life is because I've experienced the darkness of it. And the most concrete example of this is I spent 7 days in a darkness retreat, in pitch darkness, silence, and isolation. Could not see your hand in front of you, darkness. And when I came out of the darkness, the way I saw the world in those eyes, it is hard to describe how I saw the world. It was so profound and moving. I was tearing up looking at the world. And I remember very consciously thinking, well, two thoughts came through my mind in that moment. One was, I wish I could look at the world every day through these eyes, which inevitably you can't because it returns to the normalcy. But the other thought was, I felt this deep sense of gratitude for every bit of pain and suffering and struggle I ever experienced, because in a very visceral way, I came to know that you cannot truly see the light unless you have been in the dark. I will never have been able to see the world that way unless I had spent 7 days in darkness first. And that's obviously not just literal, but it's figurative and metaphorical as well, because that's the why. I mean, like, yeah, it sucks climbing mountains when you're in a brutal storm, and being in Antarctica when it's battering you with the storm, right? Like, but that's where you find something within you to transcend it. And that discovery is, I mean, like, the greatest football coach, Vince Lombardi, says, I firmly believe that any man's finest hour, the greatest fulfillment to all he holds dear, is that moment that he lies exhausted on the field of battle, victorious. And that's what it is. That's why I seek it, because when you go into those spaces, you will find something that makes life so damn exciting and so fulfilling that you will never want to stop seeking that next battle, whatever that may mean for you.
Yeah, and that's so true. And ultimately, we know from, behavioral psychology that our happiest times are those times that we expand, that we grow, that we learn, that we become more. Because,
Absolutely.
Ultimately there's this thing within all of us. It's the animus, the energy, the spirit that just wants to grow. And anything that curtails it or constrains it, is just not healthy for our soul.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
and that explains, in essence, as a species, why we've evolved so much, because we've developed this intense desire, or this intense curiosity and desire for growth. And so that's how I answer my question as well, is that yes, to attain this level of bliss and happiness, there's still another level, and there's still another challenge, and there's still something else,
Mm-hmm.
another, peel of the onion that you want to remove, because then you ultimately become more. And I love that duality. And the next part, we're going to be more specific on the duality, but I love this duality of seeking this peace and calm, equanimity and bliss by having this identification of self,
Mhm.
just experiencing life, being present, as you said, getting the full essence of the world around you, and at the same time, breaking the barriers into and walking into discomfort, if you will, and to have more freedom on the other side of that
Mhm.
fear. So this is a very um, awesome conversation I'm having with you, Akshay. I'd love to continue this for a lot longer, but we want to get ready for part 3. But how do people find you?
You can find me on fearvana.com. That's fearvana, fearvana.com. And you can find the book on Amazon in Kindle, paperback, Audible, and 100% of the profits of the book go to charity. So, that's where you can find, and you can reach out to me on Fearvana. I'm happy to help and be of service in any way I can.
That's awesome. Akshay Nanavati, thank you so much. And I know that you're training to cross the Antarctic solo without support. That's coming up next year. So anybody listening, you definitely want to, tap into his intelligence, tap into his wisdom. There's legitimacy in every single word that he shares. And part of my path of having the path of least resistance, I'm glad I didn't go through all of his stuff. But on the other side, maybe I wish I had, and I'd be somewhere else right now. Once again, Akshay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of Dr. Rademaker's Prescription for Your Transformation. Continue the path towards discovering your own authentic genius by tuning in next time for more real conversations with real people.